Imagine for a moment that everything you have been tired of searching for through the years, from clarity and strength to the feeling of belonging, was never in the places you tried to hold on to. Not in achievements, not in the roles you tried so hard to play well, not in the love you begged for during the unsteady days. They have never been out of your reach. They simply rest deeper than you once dared to look, in the quiet layer of the mind where the noise of life cannot enter. I know that sometimes the echoes of worry make you believe you are missing something, that you are not ready, that peace is a reward for someone more mature than you. But I say this with the certainty of someone who has been lost in their own soul. Peace does not come when the world changes. Peace comes when you turn your gaze inward. Deep within you is a light that never fades, a sacred imprint no wound can erase. I call it the eternal pattern, the place where the mind meets its true nature again. It is not a pattern for you to chase, but a pattern for you to remember. When I began my journey, I touched a simple yet powerful truth. The life around you is only a mirror of what you nurture within. And if that mirror reflects confusion, tiredness, or a sense of being lost, it is not because you lack anything. It is only because you are looking through the dust of fear, the traces of old memories, the patterns your mind learned just to survive. But there is one thing no one can take from you. It is the right to slow down and look into the place that is always peaceful, even when life on the outside is shaking. You do not need to become stronger. You only need to allow yourself to see the part that has always been strong. And today, as you open your heart a little more to listen, I want you to know that the path ahead is not about running away from life. It is about repairing the way you see life. Not so you can try to become sacred, but so you can discover that the sacred part has been within you all along. Breathe slowly. Let your mind settle from the weight of immediate worries. Let yourself walk into this quiet doorway. From there, we will begin step by step, without rushing, without pressure, guided only by honesty. And from that place, peace will unfold as something completely natural. There is a truth many people never hear in their early years. Your mind always works like a patient and loyal builder, and that builder can only build according to the blueprint you hand over. That blueprint is called your self-image. It is not the image you try to show the world. It is not the things you say about yourself when you want to appear strong. It is not the goals you write down at the start of a new year. Your self-image is the quiet sigh you release at the end of the day, the thing you truly believe you deserve, the invisible boundary you never dare to cross because you think that world is not for you. It is not glamorous, but it has more power than anything you have ever learned. Because the deepest part of the mind does not listen to outside words. It listens to the truth you hold inside, and it uses that truth to shape your circumstances every hour of every day. People often believe they change their lives through effort, discipline, or trying harder. But if the heart still carries a small image of itself, every effort will return to the same point, like a boat tied to a post. No matter how hard you row, the invisible rope pulls you back. Self-image works like the gravity of the inner world. It does not shout. It does not argue. It only needs your belief, and even if you believe unconsciously, it still becomes the mold through which your life flows. You always live according to the image you allow yourself to have, no more and no less. And this is not comfort. It is mechanism. It is law. Just as gravity holds everything to the earth, the law of the mind holds your life at the level your self-image permits. When you believe you only deserve small things, smallness becomes so normal you barely notice it. When you believe you cannot change, the mind will provide every reason to reinforce that belief. When you believe the world is harsh and you are always the one left behind, you will unconsciously find the experiences that confirm it. Not because you want it, but because the law does not separate desire. The law only reflects the mold. From here, there is something important you must face with honesty. You cannot change your circumstances with strong words, said in a moment of excitement. You cannot change your destiny with a few gentle affirmations. You cannot change the outer truth when the inner mold is distorted. The only thing that can truly carry you into a new life is the rebuilding of the mold inside the mind. And to rebuild it, you must first see the mold that is operating in you today. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, what do you believe about your own worth? What do you believe about your future? What do you believe about the limits you think you cannot cross? What do you believe about your ability to be loved, to be accepted, to go further than anything you have known? Adults often think they know the answers, but when they sit quietly, they realize most of their beliefs were not chosen by them. They were inherited from family, from childhood, from early failures, from a single careless sentence that stamped itself on their minds for years. And the strange thing is that these beliefs never scream. They simply repeat until you accept them as truth. A person who believes they are unworthy never needs anyone to remind them. They will find evidence everywhere. A person who believes they are not good enough will walk into a room and immediately notice someone better, someone more beautiful, someone more successful, and they will believe the comparison reflects reality. Not because it is true, but because their self-image allows them to see only one direction. When I observe human life, I see something both painful and hopeful. Painful because many people carry an image that never belonged to them, yet they live their entire lives according to it. Hopeful because that image is not fixed. It is only powerful when you refuse to look at it. When you begin to look, it weakens. When you understand the mechanism of self-image, you are no longer its victim. You become the creator of your life again. And that creation is not fantasy. It is alignment. It is choosing again. It is clearing away. It is returning the mind to the image your inner truth has always held, the one you forgot while chasing the noise of the world. I want to ask you a question to bring you back to yourself in this moment. A question adults rarely dare to answer. Have you ever felt that the mold you are living with no longer matches the person you are becoming? If the answer is yes, know that this is not failure. It is a sign that your mind is tired of the old mold and is trying to open space for your true pattern to emerge. And on this journey, awareness is the first step toward freedom. There is something interesting in the human journey that you will never see unless you pause long enough. Most of what you call yourself is actually a set of reflexes. Reflexes shaped by years, by careless words and unintentional looks, by moments you were misunderstood, criticized, or forgotten. No one tells you that the self-image does not appear on its own. It is passed down. It is learned. It is absorbed like breathing. And because you learned it so early, you mistook it for who you are. I have seen many adults full of experience, responsibility, and awareness instantly shrink into the child they once were the moment an old fear is touched. Not because they are weak, but because the image they carry inside never grew up with them. The self-image stayed frozen in old years while life kept pushing them forward. The gap between the two is what creates exhaustion that no one can explain. A person who was harshly criticized as a child grows up believing they are prone to mistakes. That belief never shouts. It sits quietly in a corner of the mind, waiting for the moment you make a choice. And right when you are about to do something important, it whispers, "Be careful, you are not good enough." That person does not need anyone to make them doubt themselves. They do it so well on their own. A child raised in a family where comparison was constant carries into adulthood the habit of placing themselves second in every situation. Even with talent, depth, and presence, they still feel the need for someone to confirm their worth. Not because they lack worth, but because they lack an accurate image of themselves. And that lack does not last a day, it lasts a lifetime. A person who was once abandoned in love may enter a new relationship with a heart full of caution. Not because they do not want to trust, but because the old self-image taught them that they can be replaced at any moment. They love but keep waiting for the day they will be left. They give but fear the day they will be forgotten. And like a self-fulfilling prophecy, the relationship becomes heavy, and they conclude they are not meant for lasting happiness. But happiness never refused them. It is the mold they carry that keeps them from receiving what they want. This is how the self-image works. It is not malicious, but it is not accurate either. It simply repeats what you once heard when your mind was too young to know the difference between truth and someone else's reaction. A careless word from an adult can become law to a child. A single failure can become the definition of self. A cold look can turn into the belief that you are not enough. And because these things happen when the mind does not yet know how to protect itself, you carry them like luggage to survive. What makes this more complex is that the self-image not only records pain, it also learns to interpret everything in ways that support itself. A person who believes they are incapable will see failure in every opportunity. A person who believes they are not lovable will see distance in every relationship. A person who believes they must work twice as hard to be accepted will never let themselves rest because they think their worth exists only when they are trying. But you are not wrong. You are only living through a mold someone placed on you long ago. And that mold once helped you survive. It kept you from being scolded. It helped you avoid situations you were not ready for. It made you small enough to stay unnoticed. It made you work hard to be praised. It created a version of you shaped by fear, but convinced you that the fear was your nature. But at some point, like everything born from fear, the mold becomes a prison. It keeps you safe, but does not let you grow. It keeps you humble, but does not let you shine. It keeps you surviving, but does not let you live. And when you begin to feel suffocated within yourself, that is not failure. It is a calling. You will notice it through the smallest signs. You walk into a meeting, and even when you are prepared, a voice tells you not to speak. You look in the mirror, and no matter how much you have changed, you still feel not enough. You receive a compliment but cannot believe it. You are loved but keep waiting to be left. These moments do not come to hurt you. They come to remind you that a part of you wants to grow beyond the old mold. I want you to understand this clearly. Insecurity is not your nature. It is only a habit. Doubt is not your nature. It is only a reflex. Fear of rejection is not your nature. It is only the echo of a past that has not been healed. When you see the self-image this way, you stop blaming yourself for your reactions. You begin to look at yourself with kindness. And that kindness softens the old mold the way soil softens before receiving a new seed. The false image is what you learned. The true image is what you were given from the moment you were born. One requires effort to maintain. The other only needs your permission to return. And your journey is not about breaking yourself apart, but about gently removing what never belonged to you until you meet the part that has been waiting for you to remember it. There is a moment in life that almost everyone goes through, yet few ever name it correctly. It is the moment you feel a strange kind of tiredness, not because of work, not because someone hurt you, but because you no longer believe in the image you have been carrying. The mask you have worn for so long begins to feel tight. What once helped you survive has become a burden. You no longer recognize yourself in the way you behave, think, and react. And deep inside you know something is inviting you to step out of the old mold. The truth is that the mask began to crack long ago. You hear its fractures each time you hold back an honest word. You feel them whenever you shrink, even though your heart wants to open. You see them in every smile you give to reassure others while your inner world longs for silence. Those cracks are not signs of failure. They are signs of truth rising. Some people think they must try harder to keep the mask intact, but what they do not know is that the more they hold it, the heavier it becomes. It presses on your chest every night. It pulls your shoulders down with the passing years. It drags your mind back into old reflexes you already know no longer fit. When the mask cracks, it is not betraying you. It is simply showing that its time is over. From the moment you were young, you were taught to become someone in order to be loved. From the praise you received when you behaved well, to the disappointed looks when you did not meet expectations, you slowly learned that your true self was not enough. So you created another version of you, someone patient, someone who could hold their breath, someone cautious, someone who stepped back even when they wanted to step forward, someone who smiled to avoid trouble, someone who nodded when their heart wanted to shake its head. And over the years, you believed that person was you. But there is a greater strength living beneath all those layers. It does not speak loudly. It speaks through the quiet discomfort you feel when you betray yourself. It speaks through the sigh that escapes when you try to perform again. It speaks through the long silence that follows when you no longer feel excitement for the things you once thought kept you safe. That is the true part of you knocking on the door. When you begin to see your mask, you may feel fear. You may think that without it, you will be exposed, weak, or hurt again. But the paradox is that only when the mask falls do you find real strength. Because the mask protects only the most fragile part of you, while the strongest part has always been hidden behind that protection. Recognizing the mask is the first step of healing, not because you will suddenly feel lighter. In fact, the early days may feel chaotic. You will feel torn between wanting to live honestly and fearing the truth. You will feel both relieved and empty. You will feel like standing in a room that was once full, but is now suddenly quiet. But that quiet is a blessing, because in that quiet, you can finally hear your real voice. Every time you notice a behavior, a thought, or a reflex that is not truly yours, another layer of the mask falls away. Every time you dare to say no, instead of forcing yourself to say yes, the mask cracks again. Every time you breathe deeply and speak your true thoughts, the mask loses some of its power. And one day you realize you no longer want to wear it. What many people do not understand is that the old mask does not fall off by force. It falls off when you become too real to keep pretending, when you become too tired to keep performing, when you begin to believe that there is a version of you that does not need to be adjusted in order to deserve love and peace. When that happens, healing does not arrive like a burst of light. It arrives like warmth spreading across your chest, like the relief of not having to hold anything anymore, like the deep exhale of a soul that has been tense for years. And from that moment, your life begins to shift, because the law of the mind needs only one thing to work: truth. And when you touch your own truth, even for a brief moment, the law begins to rearrange everything to match the new you. Remember, the mask only makes you resemble what you think others need. The truth inside makes you resemble what you were born to become. And healing is not about repairing the broken pieces of an old mask. Healing is standing in front of the mirror, seeing your true self, and for the first time, not turning away. That is the moment the journey begins. There are moments in the spiritual journey that people are often afraid to remember, yet, for me, they are the most important ones. I do not speak of them as someone who has risen above everything, but as someone who has walked through their own confusion. Because the truth is, before light entered, I too stood still in a dark room, holding tightly to the old garment of my ego, unaware that it had worn out long ago. I remember a day that was not special at all. Yet, it became a turning point. I stood before the mirror, not to fix my appearance, but because I wanted to look at myself without turning away. I looked for a long time, long enough for the roles that once covered me to fade. I saw the eyes that had tried to appear calm for years. I saw the shoulders that had learned to stay tight to prove I was fine. I saw the smile I used to reassure others while my inner world was full of questions with no answers. In that moment, I sensed something I had avoided for so long. The old garment, the ego that had helped me survive so many difficult seasons, no longer fit. It was too tight for the person I was becoming. It restricted my breath. It made me shrink just to fit a mold others once placed on me. And in a very quiet second, I knew it was time to set that garment down. But seeing something does not mean you are ready to change it. When I understood that the old garment had reached its end, I did not feel relief. Instead, I felt empty. It was as if I had dropped a familiar piece of myself that I had relied on for years. I felt fear. I felt suspended between a version that no longer fit and one that had not yet formed. It is a deeply human fear, the fear of not knowing who you will be without the old role. And I know many people stand exactly in this moment where you know you cannot continue living the same way, yet you also do not know what living in a new way means. I sat down, breathed slowly, and asked a question I had never been brave enough to ask. Why am I afraid of becoming myself? That question did not give me an immediate answer. It only created an inner space, a space large enough for me to realize that most of my fear did not come from truth, but from habit. The habit of playing strong, the habit of keeping others comfortable, the habit of carrying everything alone, the habit of proving my worth. And because those habits became familiar, I mistook them for who I was. But then something gentle within me began to speak. Not loud, not forceful, just a soft peace. It said that I did not have to become anyone anymore. I did not have to chase an image others felt comfortable with. I did not have to live in old structures. I did not have to wear a garment that no longer fit just to keep everything predictable. I realized that healing does not come from fixing yourself into a better shape. Healing comes when you stop forcing yourself into a shape that is not your own. And when I began to release the old garment, not with force, but with honesty, I felt something strange. Not light, but real. Not excitement, but clarity. When the mask falls, the first thing you face is not the light. It is yourself. You can no longer avoid it. You see what you once hid. You see wounds that were never resolved. You see the softness you once covered with pride. You see desires you kept under reason, but you also see something beautiful. You see who you have always been beneath every layer of protection. I want you to know this from my own experience. When a part of you collapses, it is not proof that you are weaker. It is proof that you have outgrown the version you once lived in. Not every crack is a loss. Many cracks are invitations. Invitations to step into the sacred essence rising within you. And today, as you read this, maybe you also feel your old garment slipping off your shoulders. Do not rush to hold it. Do not fear being bare. That bareness is where truth breathes. It is where you finally hear the voice of your spirit. If something in these words stirs you, I invite you to leave a reminder for yourself. Simply write, "I am ready to change," or simply the number 1. Not for me to see you, but for you to see yourself. Because once you acknowledge your inner intention, the law of the mind will begin to open the path. You are not alone on this journey. I have walked it. And you will walk it too, guided by the gentle truth that is beginning to reveal itself within you. There are truths that do not need your immediate belief in order to keep working. Gravity does not wait for your agreement before pulling you down. Day and night do not need your permission to take turns. And in the same way, the law of the mind does not need you to fully understand it in order to operate. It works quietly behind every choice, every reaction, and every outcome in your life. When you are young, this law feels like a natural flow, like an underground stream, no one sees, but that nourishes the whole field. As you grow older, you begin to sense its power, but you call that power by other names. Luck, fate, circumstance, opportunity. But the truth is that nothing you meet appears by accident. It appears according to the mold you have accepted for your life. Your deep mind does not create your life through willpower, but through the mold. That mold is shaped by what you repeat so many times that it becomes foundation. You may want change, you may want a new chapter, you may hope for something better ahead. But if your mold remains the same, life will not move according to your desire, but according to the mold. External effort only works temporarily, like trying to redirect a river without changing its bed. The moment a disturbance happens, everything returns to the old direction. I have seen many people make extraordinary progress in a short period of time, only to fall back to a familiar point. Not because they lack ability, not because life drags them down, but because their inner mold has not shifted. They used effort to create a new circumstance, yet they still saw themselves through the old image. And the old image always wants to return to what is familiar. It does not care what you prefer. It cares only about what you perceive as normal. And that feeling of what is normal is the real limit. Not the limits you see clearly, but the settings deep inside you. The level you quietly believe you can receive. The boundary you accept without question. The idea you summarize with the words, "It is just like this." The belief that makes you doubt anyone who says you deserve more. A person can repeat affirmations for months, but if the mold inside still sees them as small, those words pass through like rain that never reaches the soil. A person can change environments, change jobs, change relationships, but if they still believe they are not safe being themselves, they will continue to shrink into whatever version feels most controlled. Not because they want to, but because that is what they know. You can see this in everyday examples. Someone who believes they must work extremely hard to be valued will unconsciously choose environments that force them to strain. Someone who believes they are fragile will choose relationships that do not require emotional openness. Someone who believes they are not capable will automatically silence their voice in important conversations. The law of the mind works according to what you hold as truth, not according to what you wish for. And the beauty is that when you change the mold, circumstances must change with it. Not through magic, but through mechanism. The mind is the mold. Life is the material poured into it. When the mold changes, the shape of life changes. There is no exception to this principle. But to change the mold, you must be willing to look at the old one. You must be brave enough to ask what you are living by that you no longer believe in. You must face the possibility that you have been living within limits someone else set for you long ago. And the first step toward change is to see that without judgment but with clarity. Many people feel disappointment when they recognize their old mold. They say, "Why was I so weak? Why did I believe something so small?" But you are not weak. You are simply loyal to a version of yourself that once helped you survive. And that loyalty is something to honor. No one has the right to blame you for surviving the only way you knew then. But when survival is no longer needed, when your soul wants to not only live, but live honestly, the old mold becomes unfit. I have told many people, never judge yourself by the mold you are trying to escape. See it as an old garment. It once served you. It once kept you warm. But you do not need to wear it forever. When you begin to feel tight inside it, that is a signal for change, not a reason for shame. From here, change begins to become real. Because you are no longer trying to fix circumstances, you are adjusting the mold. You are no longer racing with life, you are shifting the starting point. When the new mold forms, life will rearrange itself to match it. Not through force, but through natural alignment. You do not need to push. You do not need to pull. You only need to align. Remember that the self-image is not trying to work against you. It simply repeats what it was taught. And you, in this moment, are teaching it something new. A new truth. A new image. You are bringing the mind back to the pattern it was meant to follow. And that is the beginning of a new life, not from action, but from the mold that shapes all action. There is something most people are never taught, even after they grow up, even after they experience hardship, even after they try to understand themselves in the most rational ways. It is that emotion is not the byproduct of thought. Emotion is the current that powers the entire inner system. Thought may be the shape of the seed, but emotion is the soil, the water, and the light. And when the soil does not receive, when the water does not soak in, the seed cannot sprout. Thought works the same way. You can say you are worthy, but if your body freezes when you hear that sentence, the deep mind hears the freeze, not the words. You can say you are strong, but if your breath tightens when you imagine a challenge, the deep mind hears the breath, not the affirmation. You can say you are abundant, but if your inner world still holds the habits of shrinking, hoarding, or self-defending, the law never responds to words. It responds to feeling. Emotion is the language the deep mind uses to decide what is true and what is performant. And this explains why some people can speak all the right things, yet nothing changes inside them. They speak of confidence, but avoid situations where they must truly show up. They speak of worth, but feel uneasy when someone praises them. They speak of peace, but feel restless when they must sit alone with themselves. Not because they do not want change, but because their mold has not been filled with new emotion. If you want to change the mold, you must touch the feeling of truth, not just the idea of it. This is difficult for many because they are used to their old emotional landscape, even when that landscape hurts. Familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar peace. Familiar lack feels more secure than abundance they have never experienced. That is why when you begin to sense a new version of yourself, your body is the first to react. It asks, "What is this?" It doubts. It stiffens. It refuses. But that refusal is not a sign of wrongness. It is a sign that a new chapter is beginning. Remember this. Your body is not afraid of truth. It is afraid of unfamiliarity. And peace, for many people, is unfamiliar. But that unfamiliarity is the threshold of the soul. When you want to change the mold, you must train the feeling before the thought. It does not need to be complex. One slow breath, 1 minute of stillness, 1 moment with your hand on your chest. You do not force yourself to believe anything. You simply invite yourself to feel whether there is deep inside a part of you that remains calm beneath all chaos. You do not need to feel it perfectly. You only need to open a small space, like cracking a window, so a bit of wind can enter a room that has been closed too long. You can begin by asking your body a question. If I were truly safe, how would I breathe? If I were truly abundant, how would I sit? If I were truly worthy, would the voice inside me soften, or would it harden? When you ask, the body answers through a subtle shift. Your shoulders drop. Your neck loosens. Your breath lengthens. Your chest opens slightly. This is not imagination. It is remembering. Remembering the feeling your soul once knew before survival became its main curriculum. Every lasting change must pass through emotion. You cannot perform your way into the new mold. You must train it. Train by sitting with it daily, even for a minute. Train by letting your body get used to the new frequency, even when it feels uncomfortable. Train by not abandoning the feeling simply because it is not familiar yet. Many people mistake this for self-deception. It is not. You are not deceiving yourself when you practice feeling peace. You are guiding your mind back to the original state it knew before fear became the teacher. You are not deceiving yourself when you practice feeling worthy. You are remembering something that has always been true but was buried under noise and judgment. This is not spiritual performance. This is the restoration of spiritual memory. I often say that the body is the most faithful recorder. It remembers what the mind tries to forget. It holds the tension, the flinch, the contraction from experiences you thought you had already overcome. And when you train new feelings, you are rewriting those records. Not with words, but with experience. By teaching the body that peace is not dangerous, that spaciousness does not require sacrifice, that softness does not make you fragile, that being loved does not mean losing freedom. One day, if you stay patient, something remarkable happens. Your body begins to treat the new feeling as normal. And when a new normal appears, the inner mold is changed. The law of the mind has been waiting for that moment. It does not respond to effort. It responds to state. When the state shifts, life shifts with it. What many do not understand is that you do not need perfect feeling. You only need honest feeling. You do not need hours of deep meditation. You only need a few minutes for your body to know it is allowed to relax. You do not need absolute belief. You only need to open the possibility of belief. The rest, the law will handle. When you begin to train emotion in this way, you lay the first foundation for changing the mold. You are teaching the mind and body to move together instead of running in opposite directions, like before. And from that unity, a new image forms. Not from effort, but from truth. Not from intellect, but from the original feeling of your soul. That is why this step matters. Because if you cannot feel the truth, you will never be able to live in it. And once you do feel it, nothing can take it away from you. There is a kind of sentence no one else can hear, but you, yet it carries more power than any praise or criticism from the outside. It is the whisper you speak inside your mind when no one is watching. And what most people do not understand is that this inner speech is not the noise of random thoughts. It is the soundtrack of your life. It sets the rhythm of your beliefs, the direction of your emotions, and the limits of your actions. You could live an entirely different life simply by changing that soundtrack. The law of the mind does not record what you say out loud for others to hear. It records the lines you speak to yourself in moments of disappointment, on tired evenings, in the hours when you feel not enough. And the strange thing is that those whispers, small enough to escape your awareness, have the strongest frequency. Because they come from belief, not desire. They come from the mold, not from fleeting thoughts. Someone may say, "I want peace," yet their inner speech keeps whispering, "I do not deserve it." Someone may say, "I want to grow," yet deep inside they keep telling themselves, "Be careful, do not step too far or you will fail." Someone may long for love, yet they whisper inside, "I will be abandoned like before." These whispers are not truth, but the law does not separate true from false. It only responds to the frequency you consistently emit. Your inner speech is the agreement you sign with yourself every day. And life responds to that agreement more clearly than anything you try to perform on the outside. If you appear confident, but your inner voice keeps saying you are not enough, the law hears the inside. If you try to act strong, but your heart whispers fear of being hurt, the law hears the fear. If you smile outwardly, but inside repeat the idea that you are invisible, life will mirror that invisibility back to you. Inner speech always wins, not because it is stronger than what you want, but because it is who you truly are in that moment. The deep mind does not communicate through appearance. It communicates through consistency. The line you repeat without intention is the line the mind accepts as instruction. And when that belief is strengthened by emotion, it becomes the mold from which your life is shaped. The good news is that inner speech is not fixed. It can be changed, not by forcing yourself to think positively, but by learning to recognize which lines belong to you and which are simply echoes of the past. You do not need to fight the old inner speech. You only need to stop feeding it. When you stop believing it, it loses its power. When you see it as an old story running on habit, you are no longer trapped in it. Try observing yourself. When you make a small mistake, what line appears first in your mind? On the days someone praises you, how does the whisper inside respond? When you face an opportunity, does your inner speech say you are capable or tell you to step back? These are the true portraits of your self-image. Not the things you post on social media, not the confident lines you say in the mirror, but the ones you do not have time to edit. And here is the shift. Inner speech is not destiny. It is habit. Like any habit, it can be replaced. Not quickly, but surely. Not loudly, but effectively. The first step is awareness. When a familiar line appears, see it as a visitor, not your essence. Do not argue with it. Do not force it away. Simply look at it gently and say to yourself, "This is not my truth." In that moment, you have already weakened the old inner speech. The second step is replacement. Not with slogans, but with lines that match the new mold you are building. If the old inner speech says, "I am not enough," you do not need to declare, "I am amazing." You can simply say, "I am learning to see my worth." If the old line says, "I will fail," you can say, "I am allowed to try." If the old line says, "I am hard to love," you can say, "I am opening to genuine connection." The new inner speech does not need volume. It only needs accuracy. The third step is gentle repetition. Not to convince yourself, but to remind the new mold. When you repeat a true line calmly without pushing, the deep mind recognizes that you mean it. The frequency of truth does not need to shout. It only needs steadiness. One day you will notice that the inner speech has changed. You will no longer need to replace every line. The old lines stop appearing. They fade like guests who have left after years of staying in your house. And you will notice this change in very small ways. You no longer blame yourself for mistakes. You no longer feel defensive when someone compliments you. You no longer hesitate when opportunity appears. You no longer feel small in rooms full of confident people. That is when the mold has changed. And inner speech is the first sign of that shift. Remember that life does not change according to what you say loudly. It changes according to what you say quietly, according to the sentences you whisper at night, according to the words you repeat after every rejection, according to the way you call yourself inside every time you are afraid. If you want your life to turn in a new direction, begin with inner speech, because that is where the mold begins. And once the mold changes, everything else must follow. There is a strange phase in the journey of the mind that everyone must pass through, yet very few have the calmness to stay with it. It is the phase between two versions of yourself, where the old self has begun to loosen and the new self has not yet formed. I call it the gray zone of the soul. Not darkness, not light, but a vast silence that makes you think you are lost. When transformation begins, the old self-image does not disappear instantly. It simply loses its position. It loses its authority. It loses its ability to dictate your reactions. It loses the power that once made you afraid of living truthfully. And when it loses its place, an inner space appears. A space many people mistake for confusion, for failure, for something wrong. But it is not. That space is the sign that the old structure is collapsing. And every collapse that comes at the right time is preparation for a new shape. In this phase of transformation, many people panic because the old reflexes no longer hold them. You no longer want to shrink, but you are not ready to open fully. You no longer believe in old fears, but you are not yet familiar with the confidence beginning to grow. You no longer feel the need to strain, but you do not yet know how to stand tall without effort. It is like standing in the middle of a bridge, realizing you cannot go back, but also have not reached the other side. And it is in this in-between place that the deepest training of the mind happens. Not the training of strength, not the training of certainty, but the training of unnamed truth. Many people think transformation is a process full of inspiration, but the deepest part of transformation happens in silence. In mornings when you wake up and no longer feel drawn to what once held you. In afternoons when you stare at a corner of the room and suddenly feel that everything is too small for your soul. In evenings when conversations that once defined you now feel heavy and out of place. No one says anything yet inside you a quiet knock is sounding. Keep going. The hardest part of this phase is not pain. It is emptiness. You no longer know where you belong. You no longer know what you want. You no longer know if you are right. And that uncertainty makes you want to return to what is familiar, even if the familiar once exhausted you. But the gray zone is not a sign to turn back. It is a sign that you are moving correctly. You only enter this zone when your soul has grown too large for the old box, but you have not yet seen the form of who you are becoming. Like a seed that must crack before it touches light. That cracking moment is not pretty, not glorious, not praised, but it is necessary, and it cannot be rushed. In this stage, what matters most is not knowing where you are going. What matters most is not returning to where you left. Old fears will pull you. Old habits will call you. Old voices will try to reclaim you. But if you simply stay, simply breathe, simply hold a small belief that truth is forming in silence, the gray zone will not break you. It will open you. Some call this a spiritual desert, a place with no markers, no signs, no guiding light. But the desert is not where you get lost. The desert is where everything unnecessary falls away, and only the real remains. In that desert you hear clearly the voice of the new mold inside you. Not a shout, a calling. You will find yourself speaking fewer sentences that once made you small. You will find yourself no longer wanting to please everyone. You will find desires that once felt powerful becoming distant. You will breathe differently, walk differently, be silent differently. These are signs that you are stepping out of the old mold. Do not fear them. See them as gentle footsteps toward a deeper version of yourself. And now I want to ask you something important, something that helps you see yourself in this very moment. Are you in that phase of transformation? Are you standing between the old you and the new you? Do you feel something has been lost, yet something unknown is approaching? If you recognize yourself in these lines, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to listen to yourself during a phase most people try to escape. The gray zone is frightening only when you think you are in it alone. But you are not. Everyone who has ever stepped into deeper truth has walked through this zone. And they grow in only one way, by staying in the silence long enough for their soul to reveal the next chapter. This silence is not emptiness. It is the space where your true essence rises. There was a moment in my journey when everything seemed to dissolve into emptiness. Not loss, but the sense that I no longer knew who I was, without the roles, the beliefs, the old reactions that had shaped my life for so many years. I remember that feeling clearly. It was like standing between two invisible shores. I could no longer see the old one, and the new one had not yet appeared. All I knew was that the wind passed through me, and in that wind I heard a very soft sentence. Do not go back. I had lived many years with an image of myself that I thought was true. Someone who always knew what to do. Someone who held calm for others. Someone strong enough to never allow a single day of weakness. Someone who hid their tenderness to avoid being hurt. But at some point, those parts no longer stood firm. Not because the world attacked me, but because my soul whispered that I had walked too far away from who I really was. I began to notice very small movements. They happened quietly. In the mornings when my perfect work no longer excited me. In the afternoons when I stared out the window and wondered why everything seemed fine, yet my heart felt empty. In the nights when my old comforts no longer comforted me. As if life was losing its color not because I failed, but because I no longer aligned with the version of myself I was trying so hard to maintain. I once thought I only needed to be stronger. I once thought I only needed to keep going. But the more I tried, the more numb I became. No reactions. No emotions. No sense of belonging to anything. When I looked in the mirror, I saw that my eyes were not sad, but dim. Dim, as if the inner light was covered by layers of expectations, responsibilities, and self-pressure built over years. And one day, when I sat in silence with no goal and no solution to chase, I heard a sentence rising from deep within. You must stop. Not stop acting, but stop interpreting. Stop trying to become what no longer fits. Stop rebuilding the mask that had already fallen. Stop pretending to know the way when I was clearly lost. In that moment, I felt afraid. Afraid that if I released the old version of myself, I would have nothing left to hold on to. But the truth is that the moment I softened, I sensed something I had forgotten. I was still whole. Not whole as in perfect. Whole as in my essence had never disappeared. It had only been buried under layers I believed I needed in order to be accepted. When I began asking real questions, not to find answers, but to hear the voice within, everything shifted. I asked how I would live if I no longer tried to make others proud. How I would walk if I no longer feared being judged. What my heart wanted if I did not use responsibility to cover my vulnerability. At first, those questions had no answers. Only silence. But it was not empty silence. It was a living silence, like soil resting before a new seed rises. Then I began to notice small signs. I found myself breathing deeper without trying. I felt my heart opening when people came close. I felt lightness in places that once felt heavy. I felt that the things I feared no longer had the same power, as if someone inside was clearing out an old room, removing what was no longer needed. I realized something I had heard before, but never truly understood. Humans do not become someone new. Humans return to who they really are. Transformation is not about adding. It is about removing. Removing defenses. Removing doubt. Removing explanations. Removing roles. Removing stories that never belonged to you. And when those layers fall away, what remains is not emptiness. It is you. Clear, gentle, quiet, but powerful. When I stepped into my truth, I discovered that there was no thunder, no miracle, no achievement to display. Only a very still peace. A peace that comes from no longer running from myself, from no longer needing to explain myself, from no longer living as a gift for others while forgetting that I too have a heart. I did not become perfect. I simply became real. And from that realness, something strange happened. Life responded with clarity. What did not belong to me fell away. What was aligned with me arrived on its own. I no longer needed to fight. I no longer needed to strain to keep anything. I only needed to stand in my true essence, and everything else arranged itself. That was the moment I understood what it means to step into my own truth. Not a leap forward, but a letting go. Letting go of what is not mine. Letting go of expectations that do not fit. Letting go of the old image I once protected like armor. And when I let go, I felt so light, it was as if I had found my first breath after many years. This journey does not require you to know everything. It only requires the courage not to turn back when your soul is calling you into a deeper part of yourself. And if today you are standing between two shores, as I once did, I want you to know one thing. You are not lost. You are returning home. As I began to see myself more clearly, I also began to see the world respond to me in a new way. Not because the world changed quickly, but because the way I stood before the world had changed. There is something I learned through my own experience. When the inner image is adjusted, life has no choice but to move according to that new mold. It does not move out of kindness. It moves out of law, and the law never fails. For many years I tried to change circumstances. I tried to arrange the outside world so I could feel steady. But every time I thought I had found stability, a small disturbance was enough to pull me back to my old state. Because the mold inside me had not changed. I still carried the belief that I had to hold everything, that every mistake was my fault, that my worth came from what I achieved instead of who I was. And those beliefs repeated the same familiar patterns in my life. But when I began to adjust the mold by speaking truth to myself, by looking at old stories, by releasing roles that no longer fit, I saw everything around me shift. Not in loud ways, but in subtle ones. Like an old room clearing just enough for light to enter. I began to notice that I did not react the way I used to. When someone said something untrue about me, instead of explaining, I simply stood still. When a new opportunity appeared, instead of doubting myself, I asked gently, does this align with my new mold? When a relationship no longer brought peace, I did not hold on. I understood that anything out of harmony with the truth inside me would naturally fall away. The challenges did not disappear, but I strained less inside them, because I no longer saw them as tests of my worth, but as signals showing me what part of myself still needed alignment. This shift did not come from strength. It came from truth. Then I noticed something else. When the inner mold changes, some people around you change too. Some step back. Not because they are bad, but because they were familiar with your old version and do not know how to stand beside the new one. Some come closer. Not because they are better, but because they resonate more with your true nature. Some do not understand you, but no longer have the power to define how you feel. And that is when you realize you are beginning to live a life not guided by fear. A quiet stillness began to grow inside me, one I had never felt before. Not because there were no problems, but because I no longer needed to explain myself to everything. I no longer ran toward the familiar out of fear of change. I no longer used busyness to avoid meeting myself. And in that stillness, a new kind of energy appeared. Very soft, very simple, but deeply steady. I noticed myself walking differently, not rushed and not hesitant. I walked to the rhythm of my truth, not the expectations of others. When I made decisions, I no longer asked whether others would approve. I asked whether this aligned with the mold of my soul. And I began to trust that when I lived from my essence, what fit me would find me. That was when I understood that life does not require me to be stronger. It only requires me to be truer. And when I am true, I touch a strength I could not reach before. Not the strength to defeat every challenge, but the strength to stay still when the old mind tries to pull me back. I want to tell you this from the most honest part of my experience. When you change the mold, you do not need to change others. You do not need to change circumstances. You do not need to fight life. The outside world will shift on its own, like shadow follows form, like waves follow wind, like life follows mold. You do not need to force anything. You only need alignment. If you are reading this and feel something inside you wanting to change, I invite you to do something very small, but very important. Leave a confirmation for yourself. You can write, I am ready to change, or simply the number 1. Not for me to see you, but for you to see yourself. Because the moment you acknowledge it, the inner mold begins to move. Thank you for being present in this journey. Not everyone is brave enough to look inward, but you are doing it step by step. And with each small step, your world will open in ways you cannot yet imagine. There is a truth I only understood when I had nearly completed my transformation. Life does not choose its direction on its own. You choose it through the mold you decide to live from. Every event, every person, every opportunity, every shift responds to that mold the way a mirror never reflects anything other than the shape placed before it. And only when I realized this did I understand why, for many years, no matter how hard I tried, life kept returning to the old loop. Not because I lacked ability, but because I had not changed the mold. My old mold was built from fear, from defense, from the longing to be accepted. It made me believe I needed to prove something to avoid being left behind. It made me see neutral situations as warnings. It made me invest my energy into things that were never worthy of me. That mold once helped me survive, but it never helped me live free. It worked like an outdated map. Wherever I went, it guided me back to the same familiar points. But when I began adjusting the mold by telling myself the truth, by revisiting old stories, by releasing roles that no longer fit, the first thing that changed was not the world, but my perception. I began to see clearly that not every invitation was meant for me. Not every responsibility was mine to carry. Not every relationship aligned with my soul. I began to feel the difference between what pulled me down and what lifted me up. And the moment I stopped agreeing with the old mold, its power began to fade. You can imagine the mold as a frequency. Whatever frequency you live in is the frequency that draws matching experiences to you. When you live in the frequency of smallness, you unconsciously attract situations that make you shrink. When you live in the frequency of fear, you see danger even when none is present. When you live in the frequency of lack, you draw in experiences that reinforce that lack. Not because the world is against you, but because you have not changed the frequency. But when you step into a new mold, life begins to open in ways you never expected. Not through sudden miracles, but through subtle alignment. What does not belong to you naturally falls away. Not because you lost something, but because those things no longer match your frequency. Some doors close not to punish you, but to prevent you from returning to old places. Some people leave not because you did anything wrong, but because they only knew how to stand beside your former version. What frightens many people is precisely this shift. They think they are losing, but in truth they are being refined. Refinement is gentle for the soul, but often unsettling for the ego that clings to the temporary. And when the old falls away, you stand in an open space. That space is not loss. It is the room your new mold needs in order to unfold. As I began living from the new mold, I discovered something else. I no longer needed to understand everything. I only needed to stay aligned within. And when I was aligned, everything became clear. I knew when to move. I knew when to pause. I knew who to keep close. I knew what to release. Not because I had suddenly become wiser, but because truth was no longer hidden beneath fear. The new mold is not built from positive thinking. It is built from inner agreement. When you say you are worthy and your body softens with that sentence, the new mold is recorded. When you say you are at peace and a small, quiet place appears in your chest, the new mold begins to form. When you say you are abundant and no longer feel the urge to chase to fill a void, the new mold is active. Choosing a new mold is not a loud declaration you shout for the world to hear. It is a quiet decision, but life hears it most clearly. The law of the mind does not respond to statements. It responds to the coherence of heart, body, and feeling. And when the three align, you do not need to push to create a new life. You simply live from the mold and life adjusts itself. I want you to know this. You can choose a new mold at any moment. You do not need a perfect past. You do not need permission. You do not need to wait until you are ready. You only need to agree with the truth that there is a sacred pattern within you waiting to be activated. And the moment you agree, it begins to move. You do not need to run. You do not need to prove. You only need to return to its frequency. When you choose the new mold, you are not changing yourself. You are becoming yourself. And when you become yourself, life has no choice but to adjust to you. That is not magic. That is mechanism. And this mechanism is always precise, always loyal, always waiting for you to open. As I moved deeper into my healing journey, I discovered something I had never fully understood before. Not all of my resistance came from fear of the future. Most of it came from emotional memories of the past that had not been released. I was not stuck because of what might happen. I was stuck because of what had already happened and still lived in my body, like a quiet whisper that refused to leave. Emotional memory operates more subtly than anything else. You can forget the story, forget the people involved, forget the circumstances, but the body does not forget the feeling. It remembers the moment you were hurt and tightened. It remembers when someone made you feel not enough and your heartbeat sank. It remembers when you tried to open your heart, but were rejected and your breath shortened. These memories are not stored in the mind. They are stored in sensation. And sensation shapes the mold you live from. Someone once told me they could not understand why they kept meeting the same type of person, repeating the same pain, reacting in ways they did not want. But when they looked deeper, they saw that their emotional memory had become familiar with that energy. Old memory kept pulling them toward the emotional territory it recognized even when it hurt. Not because they wanted pain, but because the body considered pain safer than change. I carried such a memory myself. Not a big or dramatic one, but enough to make me believe I had to carry life alone. I did not realize it until I saw myself constantly rejecting help, constantly trying to prove I was fine, constantly playing the strongest one, even when my heart simply wanted someone to lean on. That memory had formed a mold of self-protection, self-burden, self-isolation. The day I recognized this, I did not blame myself. I felt tenderness, because that memory was not trying to keep me small. It believed it was protecting me from being hurt again. But since it had never been updated, it kept me inside a version far too old for who I was becoming. There is a way to release memory without digging through every detail. You do not need to remember the entire story. You only need to pay attention to the moments your body reacts stronger than the situation deserves. When someone acts slightly distant and you feel overwhelming anxiety. When you step into a new room and immediately shrink. When someone compliments you and you cannot receive it. When you make a small mistake and you feel useless. These reactions do not come from the present. They come from memories still active in the deep layer. And here is the important part. You do not need to fight the memory to free yourself from it. You only need to see it with the light of awareness. Each time you notice a reaction in your body that does not belong to the present moment, that memory loses part of its power. You are no longer under its command. You begin to separate from it. And the greater the space between you and the memory, the greater the inner freedom. I remember one evening as I was about to refuse a very simple invitation, I stopped and asked myself one question. Am I reacting to the present or to a past that is already gone? That question opened a field of awareness I had never touched before. I realized I wanted to say no, not because I did not want the invitation, but because I feared the old feeling of disappointment. When I understood that the feeling no longer dictated my choice, I could choose again. I said yes, and it did not hurt. Instead, I felt myself step out of an old memory. Emotional memory is like a thin dust covering the mirror of the self. It does not make you less. It only blurs your reflection. When you wipe that dust with awareness and slow breath, the inner light reveals itself. You do not need to create the light. It is already there. You only need to clear the path for it. And the beautiful thing is that memory, no matter how deep, is not stronger than your truth. Truth does not need to fight. It only needs to be seen. When you see that a memory is running your reaction, you rise above it. You are no longer merged with it. You are observing it, and the observer is always free. Remember this. The memories that once made you shrink no longer define your destiny. They are only traces, and traces fade as you walk toward the light. Not the light of achievement, the light of inner awakening. That is when the old mold begins to dissolve, and the new mold begins to form. There is a very delicate phase in the journey of awakening that many people overlook. It is not the collapse at the beginning. It is not the rebuilding of a new mold. It is the phase where the final layers of protection begin to crack quietly. These layers are not obvious like big fears. They are small habits, familiar reflexes, phrases you repeat without thinking, subtle feelings that pull you back toward old limits. They are like thin threads, yet those threads are the very things that keep you tied to a version of yourself that no longer fits. I call this the phase of shedding. Not shedding others, but shedding the things that once made you believe they were you. The need to control every situation to feel safe. The need to please in order to feel loved. The need to stay silent to avoid conflict. The need to appear strong to avoid being diminished. None of these are wrong. They simply stop being you when your soul outgrows the old mold. When the final layer begins to crack, you feel a strange softness inside. Not the panic of earlier phases, but a gentle tiredness, as if you know you cannot keep carrying what no longer belongs to you. It is too heavy for who you are becoming. You begin to notice this, not through dramatic moments, but through simple ones. When you reply to a message you do not want to answer. When you nod in a conversation, though your intuition urges you to speak honestly. When you suppress a real feeling because you fear it will inconvenience someone. In those quiet moments, you hear the subtle exhale of your soul. Not sadness. A signal that it is time to change. The interesting part is that this final layer does not fall away dramatically. It falls quietly, like the moment you realize you no longer need to be as firm as before, no longer need to defend yourself the way you once did, no longer need to anticipate what others expect, no longer need to chase anything to feel worthy. You only need to be honest with yourself. And when honesty appears, the layer loses its purpose. Many people fear this stage because they believe without their defenses, they will become fragile. But the truth is the opposite. Fragility is not when your heart is visible. Fragility is when you live inside layers so rigid that you must keep straining to hold everything together. When the layers fall away, you become strong in a new way. Not strong to conquer, strong to stand still, to stand in your truth without asking for permission. When the final layer falls, things that once worried you begin to shrink. Judgments that once hurt no longer reach you. Fears that once directed your choices loosen their grip. You see them as old parts of yourself that no longer belong to you, yet you do not resent them. Because you understand they once protected you during seasons when you were not yet strong enough to stand alone. The most beautiful part of this phase is that you begin to see yourself not through the reflections of others, but through your own inner light. You realize you are not the image the world mirrors back to you. You are the essence that existed long before any reflection. And that realization is the deepest turning point of your life. You begin to notice lightness in what once felt heavy, spaciousness where things once felt tight, clarity where things once felt blurred. You no longer ask, "What must I do to be loved?" Instead, you ask, "Who am I when I love myself?" You no longer ask, "How can others see my worth?" You ask, "How can I live in alignment with that worth?" These questions do not come from the ego. They come from the soul. And now I want to ask you something right here as you read this. Are you feeling your final layer cracking open? Are you beginning to see that what you once believed was your nature was only habit? Are you standing in the moment where the old can no longer hold you yet the new has not spoken too loudly? If your answer is yes, I want to thank you, because you are standing at a point where many turn back in fear. But you are not turning back. You are facing truth, even before truth has fully unfolded. And that courage opens the door to the next part of the journey, the part where your real strength begins to activate. You are not losing anything. You are becoming yourself. There is a moment that I believe anyone who walks a true path of transformation will eventually reach. It is not the moment you overcome a great challenge. It is not the moment you achieve something that others admire. It is a very gentle, quiet, private moment when you suddenly realize you no longer need anything outside yourself to remain steady. A moment with no fireworks, no celebration yet, your soul knows it has returned to where it belongs. In my journey, that moment arrived without warning. After a long season of peeling away old layers, facing memories, watching my reactions, and choosing a new mold, I began to feel a strange but consistent shift. Not a strength born from effort, a strength born from no longer needing to hold myself together, a strength that came from releasing what once hid my true nature. I felt a quiet current of energy rise inside me. Not the energy of excitement, the energy of stability. It allowed me to stand upright without trying. When something came my way, I did not react the way I used to. I was no longer pulled by noise. I no longer felt the urge to prove anything. I was no longer restless when results did not come. I was no longer dependent on approval the way I had been before. Nothing on the outside taught me this. It shifted from within as if my true self was waking after a long sleep. This stability was not the silence of numbness. It was the silence of someone standing on new ground, a ground that was steady, soft, familiar, and new at the same time. Familiar because my soul had known it long ago. New because I had lived so long in a version that did not belong to me that I had forgotten what truth felt like. When real strength begins to rise, you feel something very clear. You no longer chase what once made you anxious. You no longer wait for someone to confirm you. You are no longer shaken by praise or criticism. You no longer try to fix yourself every time someone disapproves. You no longer push yourself to extremes to prove your worth. You simply stand in your truth, and that truth is enough. I remember one morning waking up and feeling a peace so deep that I paused for a few minutes just to watch it. Nothing extraordinary had happened. No good news. No impressive progress. But something had aligned inside. It was as if my mind and my soul were finally standing in the same place instead of running in different directions. That shift led me to a new understanding. Real strength is not the ability to overcome every obstacle. Real strength is the ability to not let obstacles decide who you are. Not never crying, but not losing yourself when you cry. Not never making mistakes, but not confusing yourself with those mistakes. Not never fearing, but not letting fear choose your path. In this stage, you notice that the things that once hurt you no longer have the power to make you small. Old voices, though they may echo, cannot sway you. They appear, but you look at them the way you look at an old version of yourself. You no longer try to erase them. You simply no longer agree with them. And when you no longer agree, they lose their life. You also notice something else. Your intuition returns with clarity. Not the intuition born from anxiety. The intuition born from alignment. You know what fits you without needing endless analysis. You know what to release without waiting for it to break you. You know who is meant to stay and who is meant to go. You know when to be silent and when to speak. This knowing does not come from the mind. It comes from the harmony between your mind and your soul, a harmony you have been quietly reclaiming along the way. And then one day you realize that the things you once begged life to bring you are now the things that find you. Not because you became luckier, but because you changed your mold. You changed your energy. You changed the way you see yourself. And by law, when the inside changes, the outside must follow. When real strength rises, you do not become a brighter version for others to admire. You become a truer version, steady even when no one is looking, at peace even when no one understands, complete even without recognition. And you understand that the greatest strength of a human being is not the ability to climb high, but the ability to stand tall exactly where you are with your truth unhidden. That is the moment you know you have moved from transformation into rebirth. There is something I understood only when I reached the end of this journey. It was not that I learned something new. It was not that I became someone better. It was not that I found a miraculous method. I simply returned to myself, a self I once forgot because of the rush of life, because of the expectations others placed on me, because of the layers of protection I built to survive. And when I returned, everything felt lighter than I had ever imagined. I remember the early days on this path, when I trembled in front of the questions about who I was. I used to believe that healing required me to change completely, to discard everything old, to build a stronger, brighter, more capable version of myself. But now, sitting in the stillness of my own mind, I understand that healing is not the creation of a new self. It is the removal of what is not me. It is allowing my true nature the space to breathe. I saw the child within me no longer afraid of being abandoned. I saw the adult within me no longer needing to strain to prove anything. I saw the sacred light within me no longer covered by the dust of fear. And the most beautiful part is that I did not have to search for that part anywhere else. It had always been inside me, waiting for me to be quiet enough to hear it. As I look back at the stages I have walked through, I can see how every step formed a path of deep intention. The collapse of the old, the silence of the in-between, the opening of the new mold, the release of old memories, the recognition of old reactions, the softening of wounds through kindness. I no longer hurry. I no longer chase outcomes. I simply walk one true step at a time. One morning, as I stepped outside, the air felt clearer than usual. Or maybe it was my mind that had cleared, and so everything looked different. I heard the birds in a way I had never noticed. I saw the sunlight on the ground as if it were new. The world had not changed. I had changed. I no longer looked at everything through the eyes of tension. I looked through the eyes of someone who had set down an unseen weight, carried for many years. Then I understood something simple yet profound. Peace does not arrive after you have solved every problem. Peace arrives when you stop believing you must conquer everything in order to rest. Peace arrives when you stand in your own being, not too much, not too little, neither strained nor collapsed. Peace is the harmony of mind, emotion, and soul. And when the three align, you do not search for peace. You become peace. I began to live by the rhythm of my inner truth. I spoke when I needed to speak. I stayed silent when silence was true. I moved when my heart led. I paused when my intuition whispered. I no longer chased what was not mine. I no longer feared what needed to leave. I understood that what is right will stay. What is not will drift away. I no longer tried to control life. I let life and soul move together in natural balance. The strange thing is that when I stopped holding everything tightly, I received more. When I stopped controlling, I felt freer. When I stopped fearing loss, I gained what I had never dared to receive. Letting go did not take anything from me. It simply returned what had always belonged to me. And now, as I sit in my quiet, I understand that the journey does not end here. It only changes shape. I no longer need to dig as deeply as before. I no longer need to dismantle everything. I simply need to live awake, honest, aligned with the new mold my soul has handed me. Looking back, I realize the most beautiful part is not how much I have changed. It is how much I have remembered. I remembered that I am enough. I remembered that I am safe. I remembered that I am guided from within. I remembered that I was never lost. I only needed to turn inward. And when I remembered, everything outside became simpler. If you are reading this, I want to tell you something with all sincerity. The path you are walking is not meant to turn you into someone else. It is meant to bring you back to yourself. And you, not the trying version, not the guarded version, not the version shaped to please others, but you are the place where peace lives. I have returned to my home, not the home outside, but the home within, the home of stillness, clarity, and gratitude. And I know that now that I am here, I no longer fear losing my way, because every direction begins from within me.